Yeah, sure. Let me jump on the video here. I just kind of have it turned off because I'm watching my 1-year-old now, and so I'll be kind of getting up and walking. I don't want to be distracting or anything. So, hello everyone. Aaron, you were on the last one I was on. Ken, I don't think we've had a chance to introduce each other. My
nice to meet you.
I'm Adam Sober. I'm with the Aurora Research Institute. So we're a subsidiary of the Aurora Mental Health Center. So we do they're therefore our primary client, but we do a couple outside contracts here and there as well.
Good.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go ahead. So yeah, I'm Peter, and we've met, of course, the Evaluation Center here with Jeff, also from the Evaluation Center. Aaron, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Aaron Slay. I'm the evaluation support at Denver Public Health.
And Ken?
Yeah, and I'm Ken Seeley. I'm the cross-site evaluator for Pueblo, for the program in Pueblo, Colorado.
Great. Thanks, everybody. So to kick off the new year, and also kind of going into the last 3 quarters of the PFS 2014 funding ending September 30, we have been talking about sustainability within the coalition sustainability strategies. And so we kind of wanted to continue on that line of thinking for this first roundtable to use community updates and talk kind of specifically about a situation where you may be thinking about carry on funding for your coalitions or transitioning to trying to institutionalize this within one organization. And so we kind of had a hypothetical, and maybe it's already happened for you, which would also be great to share that experience. But if you were to meet with your coalition leadership as well as a potential funder, thinking about how the evaluation data that you have been collecting you might use. And so we had a couple of questions, specifically, what evaluation data do you think would be important to share in that discussion? Have the data already been collected, or do you have plans to collect them in the next 9 months? And then how might evaluation data influence choosing whether you sustain, alter, or discontinue a given strategy? Many of the coalitions have a handful of strategies, some that have had more barriers than others, some that are further along than others. So thinking about how evaluation data might influence that discussion on those strategies. So I don't know if there are any volunteers who want to dive in, or if you have questions before we dive in.
Well, I guess I can jump on that because I think I have sort of a few questions that I'm hoping people can sort of chime in with. So for those of you who probably don't have the contacts, which is maybe pretty much everyone but Peter, I've kind of taken over the evaluation for the Aurora ASAP just in the last several months. And so I've been mostly trying to catch up to speed on what's been going on. And one of the big questions that I've been facing is, how do we demonstrate that we're actually, achieving some sort of outcome here? So we've been gathering a lot of data about, kind of some of our reach figures, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot in place. And I'm kind of struggling to think about what we can do to demonstrate that we're actually having some, meaningful impact on people, especially with some of these environmental strategies, like, I come to, thinking about some of the activities we're doing, like we put up some, materials in, bus shelters. We're working now on getting some social norming posters put up in, libraries and rec centers and things like that. And so when we're thinking, especially about some of these environmental strategies, other than just getting, rough estimates of how many people may be encountering what we're putting out, how can we take it that one step further and try to demonstrate this is actually doing good, and therefore we should keep doing it. So I hate to answer your question with a question, but I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, and I think that's compounded by a shorter timeline, at least as far as the grant funding goes. And so that has been something the group has tried to emphasize, especially in developing your logic models, and then moving on to the evaluation plans, is coming up with some sort of indicator that's more in the shorter term that you can collect data on beyond your reach numbers. And so for social norming campaigns and other data collection efforts, I think that's been a challenge, because short of really developing your own instrument on what types of attitude change you want to collect, and actually developing a sample and going out and conducting that, which takes a lot of resources to do. I think that many folks have kind of steered away from that because it is such a big endeavor and the evaluation budget in many cases is so small. So I don't know that that's a great answer as well. But in our experience, that's been a real challenge to think about for information dissemination evaluation, how to come up with a robust plan for understanding the impact it's having.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that also is interesting with that is, typically when folks have been, or some of the coalitions have been doing information dissemination, it's one of the strategies that they're implementing in combination with some of the others. And so, if it's not in an area where it's complementing some of the other strategies, that might be one that would be pretty resource intensive to continue beyond. So I know that's not really an answer. But I don't know. I mean, I think where we've seen folks try to do some more of that, it's been really where they have a more defined space and a defined audience that they're trying to look at some attitudinal changes. But beyond that, that's going to be a tougher one.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you just said, really kind of struck a chord about, when you can have those identifiable groups that you can, get some more, direct information from, because, for instance, when we're putting up, posters in bus shelters, well, how do we even identify who it was that we reached specifically to try to follow up with them? And I don't know if I want to necessarily open too much of a can of worms here, but we've been trying to work a lot with the Aurora Public Schools to try to get some social norming posters up in schools, so at least would have something of a contained population that we're trying to reach. But we're having a real hard time with that. And again, I don't necessarily want us to go too far down that road, but I guess I just kind of wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. And that's as far as developing partnerships to be able to implement in the schools, or the follow-on to evaluate efforts.
Okay, so I guess maybe I can make that a little bit more of a targeted question. So we have this series of social norming posters that we've been working with a professional graphic design group, and they have the typical message, the 75% of Aurora youth aren't using, or something like that, or didn't drink in the last 30 days, or whatever the message is. And the feedback we got from the schools is that, well, they're concerned that the people are going to misinterpret the message, that we're saying 75% do drink, even though some of the fonts to make it really clear, like the didn't drink is, in bigger letters with a different color. And I'm wondering, if other people are receiving any sort of pushback, I guess, specific to social norming, and how you've maybe tried to modify what those messages may look like in those circumstances, because that, at least, if we're taking their feedback on face value, that's their big concern, is that people aren't going to understand that the message is essentially worded in the negative.
Any thoughts from you all on your experiences trying to roll out social norming campaigns?
Well, we've worked with Rise Above, and they have a whole way of collecting data about the impact of the particular things that they do. And so we do, because we use that as part of our social norming activities, we do get feedback from them on who they think they're reaching and how they know that. But just in terms of like school campaigns, we've tried to target more particular school campaigns for the social norming things, although we do have community-wide activities in Pueblo. But the school-wide campaigns, we will have like focus groups and ask kids if they've seen any of the posters, or have they seen any of these messages. So it's not terribly impactful, but it does at least give us an indication that we're reaching or not reaching populations that we want to reach and say we want to reach.
Yeah, so I guess I hear, maybe Rise Above is the partner to ask for feedback on challenges they've experienced in taking their messaging to schools and how they've had those discussions with school leadership to assure them that, hey, the messages are conveyed in this way and students understand them. And, I'm thinking past research on this area that have shown success in reducing youth substance use might be a way for some individuals to understand that, yes, this has been tried and yes, it's been successful. That might alleviate some concerns from the school side.
Yeah, and I know Rise Above does a lot of work in piloting their messaging with different audiences, students as well as, other adult groups. And so, I imagine they probably have some lessons learned that they could share with you all on that front.
Yeah, and I remember Jonathan, it never got followed up on, but when we were going to do a mural, he said he knows some way of tracking like how many like visibility statistics of the mural. So that might work for the bus stop ads. It's connecting with Jonathan at Rise Above and seeing how he calculates that. And that might be able to get you some data about how many people are seeing those ads. But I have to follow up with him exactly how he does that. But
Well, yeah, and I know for the for our bus campaign work, we're getting some sort of estimates, and if some of the rest of you remember Will Patterson, who I've essentially taken over for, who's taking more of the programmatic lead, he's getting those, and I'm not sure if it's from the marketing people or the bus folks or whether they're sort of one and the same, but we've got those estimates there, and maybe if nothing else, I think I'm just sort of reeling from the difficulty we're having with APS, the Aurora Public Schools. And I guess I was just sort of putting some feelers out there for, is this just sort of we're just approaching them at the wrong time with the wrong idea, or whether people just have difficulty in general getting these messages up in schools, or whether it's more of a general, a lot of people having concerns with social norming just in general. But again, I don't want to necessarily hijack the conversation too much in the specific direction. But I think it's just mostly I kind of want to put that out there because I'm just desperately trying to understand why we're having such difficulty getting the social norming going in the schools.
Go ahead.
I think changes are always scary, and people may have different ideas, and they probably, first time when they receive different messages, they will always think of negative. But I think media definitely has impact, as we all know that media does, things that you put out there will have impact on people. And I agree with Jeff mentioning about Rise Above doing pilots. We can probably continue to refine our message, but we definitely need to put out some positive messages out there.
And Adam, we've had the same problems with the Pueblo City schools. Not so much we have 2 school districts in our county, and Pueblo 70 is the rural areas around the city. They're more cooperative with things. But our strategy is basically not to try to go at the school district to go district-wide, but rather to find kindred spirits in the individual schools and a principal that is willing to work with us, so that we tend to go after the low-hanging fruit where we can find that. And in fact, when we started a couple of years ago on our social norming work and our other interventions that were funded with this grant, we went to a charter school who has a high number of at-risk kids. So we were very successful, and we demonstrated that success from the charter school to another two high schools and another charter school. So they were really interested in getting on the campaign as well. So it's just kind of divide and conquer, or just go where you can make a difference. And I realize it's very frustrating working with the school district at the district level.
Yeah, thank you.
And one thing I was going to add is I think that there's also, I realize it may be too far into the game for this one, but, I think oftentimes if you can find that champion within the school district that may have a way to engage the school district earlier on, that can be successful as well, so that they feel like they've had input, even if you come to the same place, right? It's that idea of feeling like you've had input in the process. but I recognize for this grant it may be too far down the road.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we maybe messed up here, is that, going through APS, there was, there's so many involved sort of groups here. So there's the individual school leadership. We were sort of simultaneously working with the research department to try to get approval to follow up with some surveys or talking to some kids. At the same time, we're trying to get these posters approved through the communications department. And I think maybe there was some feeling like, we weren't going through people in the correct order or something like that, and some feelings got hurt, or, because it's been a sort of a cold reception to our ideas ultimately. But okay, I appreciate it, and I think sort of the silver lining here is that, since we're working primarily through the Royal Mental Health Center, we have, other groups of kids that we can present these messages to and try to get some feedback about, whether or not they're believing the messages and whether we're correcting any perceptions about how many peers are using. So I think ultimately we'll have something to do, but I just kind of wanted to get a little bit of feedback about other people's experiences working with schools, and it kind of sounds like it's a mixed bag of reactions.
Yeah, I would just add, Adam, that we've had very good luck with the libraries and also with the Boys and Girls Clubs.
Okay.
And youth-based organizations to work with those populations so that we don't have to necessarily go through the schools to get messages out.
Good idea.
Ken, can I ask you real quick, when you say kindred spirits, can you describe maybe a couple of qualities that you've seen in successful partners?
Pretty much, it's principals that have a very challenging school, and they're usually looking for links to the community to help them. And so we go in with help, and we provide free professional development for their staff. Or we have funds to provide that for them, and we tailor it to the local school needs. So it's really just making personal contacts. And same in the central offices at school districts. If you have like the dropout program coordinator would be likely to want to cooperate, and also could help identify which particular schools to go to, where we'd find that kindred spirit that would be open to having this kind of an intervention or a training program for their teachers, or a media campaign with their students.
Okay. Thanks. And then one follow-up question, when you have had success in, that charter school, for example, and then rolled out to other schools, what data had you collected or did you find most useful, if any, in going to other schools to kind of pitch the idea?
Yeah, what gets the most traction is attendance and achievement. And so when we can show gains in attendance and achievement for a target group that had this, in this case, it was our Project Respect community advocate who could work with kids who were involved in the courts and work with the families and make connections that way along with the schools. And the kids and the families see the benefit of that and are engaged. So we show the engagement, and we typically also had pretty good results on achievement, even though it was, I think our first program was maybe a 9 or 10 week summer program, but we showed achievement and kids earning credits toward graduation.
So that's kind of two strategies parallel, right? So social norming and Project Respect.
Right.
Okay, and Adam, I think this brings up a larger challenge too. You could really focus on one strategy and expend a lot of resources to evaluate it rigorously. So when you have a coalition that has 4, 5, 6 strategies, how do you balance resources so that you're doing what you feel is due diligence to a strategy, but also being sure that you're able to evaluate them rigorously? So that's not an answer at all. I think it's just a challenge that is real for coalition work where we're using multiple CSAP strategies. So it might be, I think that's kind of a part of the conversation today, is how do you decide if one strategy is currently more effective or having more traction? Do you put more resources to it, or 2 strategies? So thanks for sharing your challenges within the social norming piece. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on the other strategies that you're working on or thinking about kind of funding opportunities this spring or summer?
I think I mean, I think that's been sort of the burning topic for us, because this has sort of all been playing out really over the last like week or two. But I think now that we've kind of come up with a new strategy of thinking about, you know, what other groups of youth that are connected one way or another through the Aurora Hill Center can we, you know, present some of these messages to and try to collect some data on. But, you know, I think going along the lines of what you said, you know, I think specifically thinking about, you know, the alternative activities approaches that we've been taking, you know, those to me, you know, well, maybe not necessarily to me, but those seem to be, you know, very resource intensive. You know, if you're taking a group of kids to the botanical gardens or something like that, you know, that's going to take quite a bit of resources. And so maybe what I'm trying to get at here is, you know, how have people been trying to prioritize which of the strategies to continue, especially as it relates to trying to do any kind of like cost benefit? Has anyone thought of, you know, any ways to try to do something like that? Because again, if we're getting the most, you know, outcome from something like that costs a lot of money, then maybe that's worth it. But otherwise, you know, how do you demonstrate that?
Yeah, we're doing a cost benefit study now with social return on investment, but it's based on our Project Respect program that has a fairly high level of impact that's been shown in previous research. So right now, I just looked at the first draft and it looks very good. So we're going to find a lot of cost impact because we're improving graduation rates and reducing substance use. And so it's as you know, the high school graduation proxy is really very powerful cost-wise. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess I'm wondering if there are other outcomes that people have been able to, you know, tie back to some, you know, more or less demonstrable, you know, savings.
I'm trying to think of, but there hasn't been much cost study done in this area. So pretty much the cost studies we've done are about court costs, reducing court costs by doing community-based interventions, and also to look at how much you have to save to pay for the program, so that, and it doesn't take many kids to improve their graduation to say that would entirely pay for the program. Because of the amount of return on investment for them as earners and taxpayers and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not aware for like social norming of any cost benefit studies or alternative activities for that matter.
Right.
I think it would more likely be related to specific, so like maybe BOTVIN or other life skills curriculums, if
right.
those have been. That's something we could look for to see, Adam, but I'm not sure. I haven't specifically come across any in my experience, life skills.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, part of the responsibility is, you know, to look into it myself. Sorry about the screaming.
Okay.
Comic relief.
Yeah, just give me. I'll be back. Just okay. Move on without me.
Okay.
Maybe he has ideas. Maybe he has. I don't know.
Like I know a study. I just can't explain it. Okay. Well, maybe we can circle back around to that, but I think great questions from Adam. So Aaron or Ken and Lynn, either of you want to go next?
Sure.
Okay.
So, I mean, we've kind of contracted with former SPIF person, Becca, from Adams County to do sustainability planning with the coalition. So they kind of just got into that at the last meeting. But I think right now, in terms of the strategies, the one that's kind of having the most movement is the trusted adults. Because we did our follow-up from the conference to determine what people retained and what they've used since the conference and what they'd like more on. So they're using that data to kind of determine their direction that they're going to go, because they don't want to do a conference again. And so I think the way that they're thinking of making it sustainable is, since we have a partnership with DPS and they have grants and the behavioral health people in the schools, that in theory we would create something that we could turn over to them, and then they'd kind of be responsible for doing trainings at their schools with new staff, or just updated trainings with staff on trusted adult topics. And then I think there's also looking at doing an e-learning of different trusted adult topics, so it lives online for anyone to access. I think Alex is looking into some free platforms that we could do that through that don't cost a lot of money. And I think originally they were just going to focus on like East High School for a couple things, and now it looks like, based on notes from previous task force meetings, that they're going to try to get into Lincoln High School, East High School, and then Knoll Community Arts School to start with and pilot this to see how it goes, and then have it expanded out. So hopefully that'll help us collect the data that we need to hopefully make it sustainable for the rest of the school district. And DPS is so hit or miss because everything is so decentralized that you have to approach each school to get them on board. But since we do have the prevention specialists, it's pretty easy to get into their schools. Yeah, so that's kind of the one that's had the most movement in terms of, I think, sustainability. I'm not entirely sure where our other strategies stand. I know the policy task force is still not entirely sure how they're going to go, and I don't know how far that's going to go before the end of the grant. But I do think the way that they're thinking of making it sustainable is trying to get data from the tobacco groups about looking at how they collect data, and if it would be possible and easy to just kind of lump in marijuana underage buys with that at the same time for the marijuana paraphernalia. So there's been some talks going on with that, because if we could get that lumped in with that group already, then that would kind of make it more sustainable than get people data later on down the road to pass a policy. But I don't think a policy is going to get passed in the last year of the grant. But that would be, so I think we're in the stages of collecting a lot of the data that we probably will need to do a lot of the sustainability planning. And then the Be the Influence work, I'm not sure how far that's going to go. We're focused on East High School, but I think East High School is not entirely sure if now is a good time for focusing on this at the moment. But they still are planning on trying to have it at different events throughout this year. And then I think it would be trying to get the PTO at that school to kind of take over to make that sustainable. So I don't know that we're looking for funding to make things sustainable. We're trying to implement it into structures that are already in place that should already be sustainable to get things moving forward. So I don't know that we'd need to approach a funder at this time. I think it's more, how do we use the data that we're collecting to encourage DPS to continue these activities. So.
Yeah, that was one of my questions around, the Trusted Adult conference that you put on. So I know you collected data following that, and then I think did a post as well.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, has that come up in your conversations as far as what outcomes you were hoping to achieve from that conference, and were you able to use those data and discussions around potential e-learnings or other ways to have that transfer of knowledge?
Yeah, we got a lot of feedback on, I mean, people did get knowledge and resources from the training that we were hoping they would get, but we did get a lot of feedback that the whole only focus on marijuana was not something that people liked. They wanted it to focus on all substances and other things that trusted adults should have. So I think I didn't get to attend the last task force meeting for trusted adults, but it looks like based on the notes that they identified motivational interviewing and communication skills. And I think that came up a lot in the follow-up evaluation, is that if I'm not using this every day, how do I keep my communication skills up and like know what is the up-to-date language to be talking with youth about? And how do I talk with youth without making them feel like I'm just talking at them, but actually involve them in the conversation? So I think our follow-up evaluation got us information that we needed, since they decided they didn't want to do a conference again, to move forward. But I think we did meet some of our objectives of making people aware of being a trusted adult. And a lot of people said they went out and shared the information with their colleagues, and they recognized that it's not just something they do at their job, it's something they do in their personal life as well. So I think we made people more aware of the importance of being a trusted adult, which I think was a good outcome of the conference. So.
Yeah, were you able to learn as far as who you reached at the conference, if those were your intended audience, and if you'll, by rolling out to DPS, have made any recommendations on whether the content that you provided was right for that audience, and kind of thinking about how they expand or how they might roll out? Have you been able to provide information on that?
Yeah, and I wrote up a whole post-evaluation summary that I gave to Alex, and he shared it with the task force, and I think that they're using that as their guide for where they need to go. And then probably once they've developed some things, might turn over that information to the prevention specialists to say this is something else that a lot of the people in Denver County that work with youth wanted. So if you can find a training or develop a training to help them feel more comfortable in that topic area, then that's, yeah, I think the main thing is just turning it over to the prevention specialists to work with the schools that they're at in DPS, since they have more sustained funding right now.
Anybody else have comments or questions for Aaron?
Aaron,
Yeah.
one of the things we're looking at in our sustainability plan is to work closely with the communities the Caring Communities grants from. I assume you're working closely with that group, and could they potentially sustain some of this?
They could. They've kind of selected different priority areas than the this coalition has, especially since one is focused on Southwest Denver and one's focused on all LGBTQ youth. So they have some similar crossovers with, I think their LGBTQ is looking at positive youth development trainings, and so that involves some trusted adult work in that. So it could be taken over by that Communities That Cares coalition. But I think they've picked such different priority areas based on their communities that I'm not sure a ton of what the SPIF coalition has identified for all of Denver could really be sustained with Penn. I mean, Southwest hasn't picked their strategies yet, so it could be that in Southwest Denver this gets sustained a little bit. But I think with the LGBTQ Communities That Care coalition, it might not.
Yeah.
But Alex also sits on those coalitions with Kristen and works pretty closely. So
Good.
So Aaron, for the policy, for the paraphernalia policy, what are your kind of next steps as far as in the last time, knowing that probably a policy may not pass? Are there data kind of around the need for it that you'll be collecting, and then that might be a way to pass the baton on to say why we know it's important to pursue this?
Yeah, we're working with DDPHE's tobacco program to try to adapt their compliance check process to collect data on the sale of marijuana paraphernalia. So hopefully, they said that they think they could be able to collect data for us from February to April. So we'll have data, at least on that, a little bit of data that we could provide as basis for the need for a policy about prohibiting the sale of those in convenience stores and other places. But I'm not entirely sure what the data will entirely look like when they give it to us, but they did say that they could collect it for us.
Great. Oh, maybe have geographic locators on it as well, so you know neighborhoods that have higher need. Or
yeah, I think they probably will have, if it's anything like the alcohol data where they go in and have shown where underage sales have happened, I'm pretty sure it'll probably list the business and the address and the date that it occurred. And then that way we could geographically look at this areas of really high need and focus more maybe on that area, or just say it's a need Denver-wide and try to get it. But
yeah, and hopefully they would have a store type as well, or business type.
Yeah.
That was Tri-County that you had looked at some of the tobacco data around the store type that were most likely for underage kids to be purchasing tobacco.
Yeah, I think it does have that information too.
Great.
Yeah. So.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Okay, so Pueblo, would you guys like to share on kind of what you're thinking as far as leading up to the end of the PFS portion of the funding and what's been happening with you guys?
Lynn, do you want me to talk, or do you want to talk, or we can both chime in?
Yeah, Ken, go ahead, please.
We're having a follow-up to our summit meeting from the fall, where we identified the priorities, the winnable battles going forward. And then we're going to have a work session a week from today with the group that attended the summit, probably a smaller group of those that attended the summit. And then from that work session, we're going to be designing the action plan for 2019. And a big part of that is the sustainability question. And how do we do that? We are in many ways fortunate because this one community is a community-wide coalition for prevention that's been around since 2003 in some form or other. And it has passed among a number of different community agencies as its sponsor. But we really got it onto this collective impact philosophy. And I think that we know the importance of any prevention initiative has got to have a backbone organization that can put resources into making things happen, to basically staff the work. Otherwise, things don't happen just from a coalition coming together occasionally to talk about issues in the community. We went down that road, and we kind of call that admiring the problem. So we're not going to be admiring any problems anymore. We really want to be action oriented and see what the next steps are from 2019. And I think to use the resources that we have in this last year of this grant to make a smooth transition. And it could be that there will be another community-based organization other than Crossroads that would pick this up. And we were thinking, as I mentioned to Aaron, is the Caring the Communities That Care grant, which continues. And Lynn serves on their group, their evaluation group and their advisory group. So we have a close relationship with them. They're very much supporting our work and vice versa. So that may well be the future for sustainability as far as a backbone organization, which is our health department. So that's where we are at the moment. We continue to use the data that we get from the Healthy Kids Survey. That still has a lot of currency with the organizations in the community. The Rise Above data and the Rise Above activities and the Speak Now campaign, those are all things that are being used. And I think, like Erin said, we're going to be working with Becca this spring to make a more formal sustainability plan in the final 5 or 6 months or so on this grant, and to see how we network going forward and try to bring resources together to keep this strategy working, because I think it's having impact. I realize there's going to be new grant opportunities and new funding streams, and vaping is coming in big now, and maybe there'll be some things from the legislature this session for funding for prevention of that. There's lots of new things on the horizon, I think, that, and I think the opioid prevention, there's going to be a lot of money in opioid work, but a lot of the prevention has just been talk so far. But I think a lot of the stuff we do with this SPIF grants would be a good fit for opioid prevention for youth going forward. So there's some new possibilities we're going to be looking at as well as a community. And with our coalition, since we have most of the major players that do youth prevention work around the table, we just want to look for the right set of resources to put in place to sustain this work. Lynn, maybe you want to say something more.
I think you're very comprehensive. I think collective impact and working with groups. Also, we will continue to monitor those indirect measurements. Some of them could be direct, like attendance, but yeah, HKCS data will always be a great, consistent measurement to reflect what's really going on. And with the collective impact report, then we can probably hopefully identify what efforts works better.
Yes.
So.
And I know you guys have been a coalition for many years, and so I'm hoping a couple of questions of your experience are related to this, because you have seen funding come and go, and one community really has continued its work across different funding types. And so I'm curious if you can think of an example in the past when you really had a promise in a strategy that you had a robust evaluation for, that maybe the type of funding that came after kind of changed what the focus was. Did you have a time where a strategy went away just because it really wasn't the focus of what the future funding was, or maybe you were still successful in funding it in some way because you were able to leverage other resources? Just wondering if you can share your experience with seeing strategies come and go because of factors related to evaluation and funding type, and if you could provide an example, that'd be great.
Probably the best, most recent example is the Safe Schools Healthy Students Grant, a big federal grant, 5 years. I think it was $3.5 million. We had a very robust evaluation with an external evaluator. And I was a part of the external evaluation team for that. And we probably had a few $100,000 a year to spend on evaluation. So we had an opportunity to really do a lot of looking at these prevention programs that were developed in the schools and in the community. And then when that came to an end, that kind of all went away. But so what we lost was the funding for the direct services, the direct interventions. What we didn't lose was the coalition, because the governing board by federal requirement was not a school board. It was a community board. So we had, like the deputy chief of police was the chair of the governing board. It wasn't an advisory board. It was a governing board. The governing board chose how money was spent and what programs got funded, what didn't, and kind of where things went. So when all of that went away, a lot of the governing board became members of One Community, and One Community was formed at the end of this by design as a sustainability plan with the remaining government federal dollars. So I think we've learned from that kind of experience, and where we fall short and where we're, I think, as a community not as effective is that we are not spending anywhere near what we should be spending for these interventions with kids of all ages, and that's why I think the coalition is important to keep at least what resources we have going in the right directions and being shared. And it's really developed a much more spirit of cooperation and collaboration, whereas in previous years it was much more competitive, and the nonprofits and the service providers were competing with each other, not cooperating in any way with each other for the dollars that were coming into the community. And I think that's really changed now in the last 10 years, that everyone's cooperating, and when somebody gets money, they're willing to give money to other places in the community to have things happen. So, but losing all of that federal investment was a big loss for direct service programs, and a lot of kids are not getting services now that need them. Lynn, I don't know if you have any reflection, because you've been around the school district quite a while as an outside evaluator as well as part of the school district staff. Any observations you saw from that big transition in the community?
I see programs come and go because of the grants, yes. And I sometimes they get to continue, like in the school district, they don't necessarily will continue certain programs. But I do understand that with the short time that I'm with the prevention effort, that the coalition that Cheryl led has continuously going on, regardless of the grant, whether they run out or not. So that's something that I think we need to have a group of people that are really passionate about this, and then continue to do that. It can be difficult, especially without grant. I think Pueblo has that kind of synergy there. So.
I just want to ask you guys another question, given your long history and experience. You know, it has come up again and again, given so many CSAP strategies, how do you adequately evaluate any or all of them? Do you have any insight or experience to where you found something that works better? You know, one strategy you tend to focus more your efforts on. I know, like for Project Respect, it was the National Center for School Engagement was already conducting the evaluation, which is a nice parallel to support them in their efforts. But yeah, any advice? Because I think that is an ongoing challenge of not only having limited evaluation resources, but then deciding what to do with them.
Well, I'm sorry, if I could jump in real quick, I just want to say thank you to everyone for your feedback earlier. I've got to get running to the preschool now, so everyone take care, and hopefully I'll have some triumphant news about our social norming campaign next time we meet. In the meantime, you guys take care, and I'll talk to you later.
So long, Adam.
Thank you.
Good luck.
So the way I think that we've kept evaluation alive as part of the coalition effort is by setting priorities the way we have with the winnable battles. I think that was a really good strategy for the leadership of the community, the prevention work going on in the community as to what's most important and also what's most possible, being balanced against each other as part of the evaluation of what we evaluate and what we raise money for as a community. And I think having our website and dashboard, we have our outcomes out there. So we're very outcome driven. And to the extent that we can gather data, and it's, as you guys know, it's very difficult to get people to report data on how students are doing in the community, how youth are doing. But we do our best to get that kind of data up on the dashboard. And it's often a school district report or a Department of Education report or kids count report, as well as the Healthy Kids Survey data. but to have it up there where everyone in the community can access it and use it for their fundraising efforts. So Boys and Girls Club, for instance, just had a great interaction with Lynn to get the correlational study that she did. And they want to use that data as, setting priorities for the Boys and Girls Club programming.
Great.
And also to do more of the evaluation work that they do as part of their requirements of being a Boys and Girls Club. So those are just some of the things, but keeping the outcomes out there and not just have this really, as I said, admiring the problem stuff of saying, isn't it awful that so many kids are smoking pot, or isn't it awful so many kids are drinking? Too bad, poor us. Is to really just say, no, we've got to set outcomes that we want to achieve and work toward, and to get as many hands and seats around the table as possible to solve the problems.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I think that's great. It made me think as well, maybe knowing that you have evidence-based strategies that you've chosen and they already have evaluations designed or have been done in multiple ways that you can actually research how they've been studied would be a way to not have to put so much effort into designing an evaluation, but you could adopt some of what's already happened. And then I think also kind of the order of impact along CSAP strategies, with environmental strategies being likely the most impactful down to information dissemination. I mean, different purposes on why you have the strategies, all important, but perhaps evaluating environmental strategies more rigorously or putting more resources to that, because they're likely having a larger impact on a universal population.
Right.
Harder to tie to just your efforts, of course, as we know the challenges with that.
And plus, many of them are long-term effect.
Yeah. Which is another challenge when you have a 5-year cycle or a 3-year cycle with, as you well know, tying your efforts to your longer term outcomes. So, well, thanks for sharing, Lynn and Ken and Aaron. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think we're all working on sustainability this year, and so it's good to keep our feet to the fire about that and try to figure out how we can use the coalition as the lever for getting the resources we need to continue the work.
Yeah, and I would just certainly say that, we know that sustainability is going to be the big focus for the communities this year. And so if there are ways that we can help you all in thinking about how evaluation can support that sustainability, please reach out, because we're certainly eager to help you. We know that, all the coalitions are doing really great work. And so if there's ways we can help to sustain that work through evaluation support, we're eager to do so.
Good.
And I'll echo that, just a specific example, even if it's something like you have evaluation data that you want to think about how to visualize it and create a product that's friendly for a specific audience. Something like that's an example of how you might use your data in sustainability. So
one of the things that you guys have been very helpful is identifying effective strategies from other places where you run into it. And one of the things that I've wanted to try to get some feedback on, and I'd love for you guys to just look at the research on this. And it's an intervention. It is a CSAP approved intervention called Preventure. And it's been used extensively in Great Britain and Australia. And it is a way of identifying characteristics of children that are most predictive of addictive behaviors as adults. And it had the research I've seen, at least from Australia and Britain, is very compelling. And I'd be interested in you guys just taking a look at that. You can just Google it and just see what the studies are that are out there. I'd be interested in anything you have, because getting something new, and particularly something that begins at an early age, would be great for our community, and I think for some of the other communities to look at as well, because this would begin in preschool, or could begin in preschool and kindergarten, in looking at these personality characteristics that predict addictive behaviors. So,
and whether it has biological links.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
But sometimes
Yeah.
something like that gins up some excitement for like the school district or other partners. They'd be willing to raise money for that. But I'd be interested in you guys take a look at it with an expert eye and say, does this really look as good as it looks? I mean, is it really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has anybody adapted it for the U.S. and tried it? Yeah, we can definitely look at that.
Some researchers, I think, in New York have, but I don't know how extensive they've replicated that work in this country, in what situations either. So any insights you get, I'd appreciate. And same for you, that if you find things out there as you look at things that, no, there's this great program in Cleveland or this great program in Chicago or whatever, we'd like to hear about that. And you've done that in the past. It's been very helpful.
Good. Yeah, I know actually that you just reminded me, Ken, I did find one, this is a Pew Research Center study, and it was just released 2018, and it's the social media platforms most used by youth.
Oh.
And I thought this was really interesting given so many youth-connected organizations are using different social media platforms to disseminate information. And so actually YouTube came up as the number one. Snapchat was second, Instagram was third, and then Facebook. And I know a lot of times we as adults put Facebook first, then Instagram, or maybe Instagram first. But I can share that with you all.
Good. No,
and I was thinking of sharing that with the program leads too, because definitely relevant. Great. Well, I was thinking we're about out of time, but for the February meeting, I'm not sure if anybody has used this, but Google Data Studio is a newer Google product that is somewhat of an automated dashboard that you can generate reports with background data. You can upload CSVs, you can use Google Sheets, and then you can use a variety of other types of data, including website analytics. So we are going to try using the community outcomes data that we've collected for all the communities plus the state for the grant. We're actually going to try and, instead of creating static profiles, we're going to upload those data to this studio and see if we can play with how that might look for a nice platform for you all to be able to download PDFs of just your data, but then also compare to the other PFS communities as well as the state. And so, yeah, it's a new tool for us, and I think as we play with it, we'll learn the ins and outs, challenges, and benefits, and I'll try and share kind of where we are in February.
Sounds good.
Good. Sounds good.
As always, I welcome any other ideas. If you guys have topics you've learned about or are itching to discuss, let me know. Would love to have some, because we're kind of playing month to month. So anything you'd like to talk about March or April, shoot me an email.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, y'all. Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Too. Thank you.
Bye.